Hey guys, it's Graham. What's cracking? Today, part 3 of the 5-minute Silmarillion just went live over on the Substack. I'm re-recording this video right here because I started immediately going into the weeds about what that was and why I was doing it. It's like, well, all of it's on the stack for one, and for two, I'm going to be doing videos of all of those pieces. Like the whole point of the Substack scripts was that they would eventually serve as scripts for well-produced videos on the same subject. The Silmarillion, aka the Old Testament for Middle-earth, is an explanation of everything all the way back to the beginning, to the god Eru Iluvatar and what he created and how it eventually led up to The Lord of the Rings, which is the most popular installment of Tolkien's Legendarium, but certainly not the only thing that he wrote therein. The man just loved hyper-focusing on details and minutiae, and a lot of it he rewrote over and over again. That's something I'll get into in the different chapters. But you could just tell that this was his absolute passion. Like, writing was how he engaged with his own imagination and shared it with the world. I've got a copy of his book, Letters from Father Christmas, that he wrote to his children for decades, published by, was it his daughter or his granddaughter, Bailey Tolkien? I can't remember now. But in addition to all the stuff that he did for his professorial work and for his writing and all of that, he'd write these elaborate letters with illustrations for his kids every year from Santa Claus, from Father Christmas. It was just something that he loved. In preparing for the 5-minute Silmarillion, I took a look at my library and I realized, I actually own 5 copies of this book. I thought, how did that happen? I started tracing it back. It's like, oh, it's actually pretty organic if you think about it. 2003 was the first time that I bought a copy. It was the simple mass market trade paperback. I got it from, where was I shopping for books at the time? I might have gotten it from Barnes & Noble, but I think B. Dalton Booksellers at the mall was still open. The cute chick that I liked behind the counter, I don't think she was working there at that point. She was working there when I was buying Animorphs books many years before. But I bought just a cheap copy to read through it because I had read The Return of the King in preparation for the movie, which was actually going to come out while I was on my mission, and so I would actually have to wait until 2005 to see that. But I wanted to read the Silmarillion when I was 18, and admittedly, it was impenetrable for me at the time. I think I got through the Ainulindale. I might have gotten through part of the Valaquenta, but I didn't end up reading all the way through the Silmarillion itself and the legends and the stories of Feanor and all of that stuff. But I was able to recognize the similarities between how Eru Iluvatar and the Valar created Arda, the world of Middle-earth, and how the biblical story of the creation goes. Is like, oh yeah, here's me recognizing spiritual stuff. But I got that one, and it stayed in my library. It's sun-faded and worn and weathered, and that was the first one that I bought. The second copy that I obtained was in 2005 on the mission. There was another guy in my mission, my zone leader, who had bought the 5 books in a matching set in Spanish. All 3 Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, and the Silmarillion. As part of a language study exercise, one of those things that mission president would have looked at it and been like, he wouldn't have told you not to, but it was one of those things like, okay, how much energy are you really supposed to be focusing on this versus reading other things in Spanish for missionary work? But as he was getting ready to head home, he was downsizing, so I bought those off of him and I brought them with me. I still have not finished reading The Hobbit in Spanish, and that is the easiest of those to read. As fluent as I am and as experienced as I am with Spanish, reading books like that is very tiring. It's different from being conversational and using practical stuff, like sitting down and reading something end to end. I also realize from time to time, like a little bit to my frustration, that I've lost a grip that I used to have on turns of phrase that don't translate directly. Like, I used to understand those better, and now when one pops up, my brain tries to directly translate the words instead of understanding that this means something else. Like, for example, I saw one recently, en plena juventud, which really means like in plain youth. but it's actually their version of saying like in his prime or in the prime of youth. And I was like, oh crap, right, that doesn't mean exactly that. It means that I do need to spend more time reading, and not just books, but also maybe like newspaper articles, social media stuff in Spanish to stay sharp on that, because as good as I am at Spanish, it could still decay. And in fact, to some degree, it has. But I do have a copy of the Silmarillion in Spanish, and eventually I'll read it in that language before I die. So then I came home, and for years, those were the only two that I had. And then I planned on getting an audiobook version. Famously, the English audiobooks of Lord of the Rings were narrated by Rob Inglis for years. And I'd had those. I'd listened to them once or twice through. And he did a fine job. The only thing that I got frustrated with was I didn't care for when he was doing like the singing or the poetry. I thought he kind of had a grating cadence for all that. There was in existence an audiobook narrated by Martin Shaw, but it was hard to come by. And it wasn't on Audible in the US. The only Audible version was in German, which I don't speak yet. Finally, just a couple of years ago, the Martin Shaw narration hit Audible. I used a credit on that. It's like, perfect. I would listen to that. And I swear, like within a year of me getting that, the Andy Serkis versions of all those books hit Audible. Apparently he read some of those online during the 2020 lockdowns, and the publishers approached him and was like, hey, why don't you do a full bit of this? And so he's narrated all 5 of those books, and now I have all 5 of them in my audio library. I'm reminded every time I listen to The Hobbit that I appreciate the callbacks to it that are in The Lord of the Rings, and like the role that it plays in setting up that much larger, more thorough, more detailed story. But I don't actually enjoy reading The Hobbit itself. It is a children's book, and one that's just like a whimsical fantasy journey. It works as something surface level. If you've read other parts of Tolkien's Legendarium, you know that it's important and what the background details of it all are and everything. But just reading on its own, I'm like, I actually get kind of bored with this. But the Andy Serkis narration is great, and obviously he completely crushes the Gollum role. He would know a thing or two about that. And those are 4 of the copies. Finally, the 5th one that I bought that came out last year or maybe in 2022, the publisher released this really nice hardcover edition of it, along with a hardcover edition of the Lord of the Rings all in one, with colored illustrations by Tolkien. Like he did his own drawings for these. And I was like, well, why don't I go ahead and get a really nice print edition, because how often do I pick up the Spanish one and thumb through it? Not very often. My 2003 paperback is my old beater version. I'd like to have a really nice version for my library. Beautiful full edition, or for full color, hardcover, like nice coloration and print around the edges of the leaves and fold out maps and stuff. Beautiful. So thus it is that I ended up having 5 copies of this well-loved but less read piece of Tolkien's Legendarium. I'm going to close by talking about kind of a revelation that I had recently, like more of like a development of my own opinion on something, which is important to do. We should all be working through our own thoughts and coming up with our own way of expressing our own opinions on various subjects. Don't just repeat things that have been fed to you. That's something that's far too common in our society. But I was thinking about how casually people throw around the term autistic, like, "Oh, I'm autistic about this," or I'm this is how my autism manifests and stuff. I think that we've gotten too casual about that term. Now, this isn't something that I'm offended about because, like, oh, I know somebody who's autistic and that's not what autism is. It's like, okay, so yes, my brother-in-law is diagnosed autistic. He's functioning, but he's not like high functioning. He'll never be able to be like completely independent. He'll always have to live with somebody. He can read, write, he can dress himself and all of that stuff, but he would never be able to like go out and hold a job, that kind of thing. Um, he's kind of my hero in a lot of ways. Every year on Father's Day, like he handwrites me a card, sends it in the mail, and or calls and just says like thanks for being a good dad, and breaks my heart a little bit. Not to get too deep into family lore, but my father-in-law abandoned the family shortly after I got engaged to my wife, and in fact, he was in town uh, where we got married and like couldn't be bothered to show up to the wedding reception. Still pretty pissed about that. Sore subject for my wife, but he's completely AWOL. Nobody can reach him, and just decided, I guess, that my mother-in-law didn't need any of that alimony or child support for the minors that were still at home. It has really sorely affected my brother Patrick, who's the way that his mind works. It Things like that are always present, and for years after the fact, every time we showed up for holidays, he would still like mention, "Hey, I hope Dad shows up." I'm like, "Oh shoot!" Um, and it's important to him that hey, that I try to be a good dad to my kids, and he sends me a letter every year saying something to that effect. I'm like, man, that's a kick to the nuts of my heart right there. But that's not why I'm sore about the overuse of this word. I think that it takes away the ownership that we would otherwise have for our passions. And Tolkien is a prime example of that ownership. Uh, he was really the only one doing what he was doing at that scale and with that level of intensity in every aspect of his life. This is a man who played with languages for fun, who invented them for fun, who had such a passion for it that he went at it whole hog and unapologetically. And like by sheer force of will and by execution, ended up changing the course of Western art and worldwide art with creating what he did. The Lord of the Rings in particular, but the larger legendarium. He taught language. He created language. He did language for fun. And he went so hard in the paint on that he created an entire genre of epic fantasy that people are still expanding on today. Um, and he never apologized for that. Granted, in his day, there wasn't this mindset of like, oh, I'm autistic about this or whatever. For a while there in the 90s, everybody was just a nerd about something. Don't chalk it up to anything other than I love this thing and I'm going to do this and I'm choosing to do this, and I'm not blaming it on some fixation that's outside of my control or some neuroses that I have. This is what I love, and damn it, I'm going to expound on this to the uttermost farthing and to the nth degree. Be proud of that. Explore something to heights that you couldn't have possibly imagined. Get at it, go at it, never stop. Look what you might create. And even if you don't make $1 billion off of it and create a super wealthy estate and have influence over the entire artistic world, I mean, it would be nice to do all that, but wouldn't you just love to do that with something that you love? I'm kind of talking in circles here, but I think you get what I'm saying. Don't blame it on autism. Most of you aren't autistic anyway. You're just crazy. You're passionate. Don't be afraid of that. All right. That's it for now. I have blasted out my route in a matter of 8 hours, and today is pole day at the gym, so I'm going to go get my swole on. Y'all drive safe. See you out there.